like you thought it should work. Well, goodness gracious, it's a good thing y'all are here. Because I did the same thing. When I first started growing roses, I learned from Deanna Kraft that you can make more bushes yourself. You didn't have to pay for them. And I'm just about as cheap as they come. And they showed me how to root a rose, and I went home and I cut about 50 cuttings. And I had little sticks and everything that would hold dirt. Not a one of course, I didn't say that. I didn't want anybody to think that I didn't know what I was doing. So I tried again and again and again. And finally I said, Deanna, I must have missed one of the steps. Because I tried about 400 times and I don't have one cutting yet to root. And she said, well, Gaye, you know that only about 10% of the time it works. And I said, well, I ain't never doing this again. Because I'm not doing anything that is only successful 10% of the time. Well, I have a great friend named Mark Shambley who owns Shambley's Rose Nursery in Tyler. He roots about 500,000 cuttings a year. He can do it in his sleep. He does it without even thinking. And I said, you know, if I want to really learn how to do this, I need to go up to the guy who does 500,000 of them a year and has a 98% live rate, and I'll see what I'm doing wrong. So I went up and helped him for a week. I was the slave labor. And I'm telling you, we worked and we rooted cuttings and we went out on the medians on Highway 69 at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, and we took cuttings until I thought my hand was going to fall off. And then we rooted. And I got it real fast, all the things that I was doing wrong. So, this is not so much about me telling you what's right. This is more about teaching you where the train gets off the track and how to tell when the train's getting off the track and fix it before it gets hopelessly wrong. Now let me see if I can make this thing work. I am not that person that is technically minded. I'm obviously not that person that can make this thing work either.
Did you push the little on button on the left side?
I did that.
That on the right side of it works.
Okay. There's two ways to make new rose bushes. One is by seed. We're not going to talk about that. That's another program. And then the other way is by rooting cuttings. And on the science side, we call those meristem cuttings. It's the growth point of the plant. Normally, we take cuttings from the top of the canopy, not that old stuff down at the bottom. We usually take it on young, vibrant, blooming stems. The difference is if we make a new rose bush with a seed, you never know what you're going to get. I have seen people take a red hybrid tea and cross it with a white hybrid tea, and you'd think, well, they're going to get a pink hybrid tea? No. They got 5 different kinds of roses: miniature, climber, shrub, something we threw in the garbage, but nothing was a pink hybrid tea. Because there's so many ancestors in the background of roses that when you grow them from seed, you never know. It's always a surprise. On the flip side, if we root something from a cutting, we get an identical clone of the parent. It's going to be exactly the same. So, it's all about the roots, okay? All about the roots. You're going to get roots. You can get roots one of 2 ways. You either have an on-root rose. It's the same plant above ground and below ground. That means that was a rooted cutting at some point in time. So you go to a nursery like the Arbor Gate, every rose they got is an on-root cutting. It started from another plant. Or it could be a grafted rose. A lot of times when you mail order plants, you get a grafted rose. That's a different rose underground than the rows above ground. They just grew together. We're not gonna talk about that. That's another program too. Now, there is no right or wrong way to do this. If it works, it's right for you. Okay? I had a little lady when I was learning how to do this, and she lives in Arizona, and she's at least 100. And she would open up her garden every year for people to just walk through, and doesn't matter what you like or what you grow, you left with a piece of a plant. And she grew a lot of old garden roses. And she didn't ever buy anything, and so she rooted them all herself, so there's always pots and pots and pots and pots. And you'd say, Miss Mary, how do you do this? Because you have so many. I said, you have to have a rock and a cat's tennis shoe. You have to have a what? And I said, she's 100, she's crazy.
You have to what? You have to what?
A rock and a cat's tennis shoe. Because she swore that the only way she could get a cutting of any plant to root is if she laid it on this perfectly flat rock, and she took her kid's tennis shoe that she only used for this purpose, and she rolled the stick on the rock 10 times, and then it would root. Okay? She's serious. I mean, she is serious as a heart attack about this. Well, the scientist part of my brain says it has nothing to do with the rock or the tennis shoe. So I made her demonstrate. What it was and why it worked is she rolled it just firm enough that she cracked the green skin of the stem where the roots could come out. But you're not going to convince her of that. It was the kid's tennis shoe and the rock. So whatever works for you, stick with it. If you're having trouble, you start with the baggy method. That's where I start. And the reason you start with the baggy method is because when the train starts getting off the track, you can see exactly where things are going wrong, and you can jump in and fix it. But for a while, you still can't. Okay, there's a lot of ways that people root cuttings. They put a Coke bottle. Patsy Williams is great about having a farm full of Coke bottles and pots. And that works for her. Then other people will direct stick into the garden and put a jar or a bottle over that. That may work for some people. My granny did it this way. She just went out and jabbed something in the dirt and then it grew. And it didn't matter what it was. It would just grow. There are some people, and I've done this, I've rooted cuttings in plastic drink cups. Not these red ones. I've rooted them in cups. Colonists rooted roses and brought them to the United States stuck in potatoes. And people still do that to this day. They root rose cuttings in a potato. I've never made that work. That's not the right method for me, but there are people that can do that. Some people, not anybody I know, that will try air layering, and that's work. That's where you wound a plant above the ground, and you wrap moss around it, and then you wrap foil around that, and then you go check it once a week to see if there's any roots in the moss. That's labor intensive. At the Antique Rose Emporium, they will do what's called pegging, and that's very interesting. If you've got a rose that roots when it touches the ground, much to your dismay, if you take those stems and you purposely peg them with a clip down to the ground, you get another plant that you just simply harvest and pot up, and you got another plant. I've never had much luck with that. Now, all of those things had something in common. Anybody notice what it was? You can't see the roots. You can't tell what's going on in the pot or under the ground or in the jar or in the cup. And that's the most important thing. You got to be able to see what's going on the business end of that stem. So that's why the bagging method works. So let me show you how to do this. You need, and this was in the American Rose Annual last December, and there's a copy of that article with pictures. So if you're a note taker, you don't have to take so many notes because I got it with pictures and then step-by-step instructions. But you need a few things. You need good, sharp pruning shears. You need a straw, a drinking straw. You need a Sharpie marker. All this stuff is probably stuff you already have at home. You need a pencil or a chopstick. You need some peat pots. Now you probably don't have those at home because you can only buy them in the spring, usually at Walmart. So I have some sources where you can get peat pots. You need a rooting hormone. We're going to talk a lot about a rooting hormone. That is usually where the train starts getting off. You need a plastic cup or cups, depending on how many varieties of roses you plan on rooting. You need a potting mix. We're going to talk more about that because this is not where you go out and buy the most expensive mix you can afford. You need some gallon Ziploc bags, and I like the kind that actually have the zipper as opposed to the kind that you press the 3 lines and you hope they turn green. You need a pie pan, some Super Thrive. This is Super Thrive. This is the secret to make it work. And you need a paintbrush or a cotton swab. So you probably already have everything except the peat pot, maybe the Super Thrive, and you might change your brand of rooting hormone before we through. Now, go back. I do this 2 places. I do it on a patio table that I have sprayed with Clorox and then covered up with something that just came out of the dryer. Or I do it at my kitchen sink where I have sprayed everything with Clorox because this is where you want to work clean. If you bring bacteria into this process, you're going to start failing from the get-go. So the whole idea is get as healthy of a cutting in that bag as possible and avoid bringing in something that could make the cutting fail because you were simply working in a dirty spot. So, first thing we want to do, we're going to do this step by step. You're going to fill a plastic drinking cup up with water and 1 drop of Super Thrive. Okay? I never do this with just 1 rose at a time. I usually, when I root cuttings, I usually have a whole bunch of different plants to root cuttings with. So I will put the name of the rose on the cup, and then the cutting, all of the cuttings say of the Gaye Hammond rose going in the Gaye Hammond cup. Now, some people do not use Super Thrive. There is a reason why Super Thrive makes it or breaks this process. When a rose is wounded, there are hormones in the plant that get dispatched to where the wound is. And the job of that hormone, it's called an axion, A-X-I-O-N, is to heal wherever the damage was. And it doesn't matter if your husband let you snick it with the weed eater, or you're purposely trying to root a cutting. A wound is a wound. And so what we want to have happen is the stem to send those hormones to the bottom where we want the roots to be. And because it's in the dark, the end of that stem, in a moist environment, those hormones will promote the development of roots. Whether or not we use a rooting hormone, the fact that we added the Super Thrive, we put in more hormones than the plant naturally had, and there's more stuff to make roots and to encourage roots to develop. So, of all the rooting hormone products out there on the market, Super Thrive is the only one that has the hormone most closely related to the natural plant hormone. And you're not going to find it on the label. It's a word about that long, but they call it IBA. That's the only one that has IBA as the hormone. They call it the active ingredient if you're helping on the label.
Hey, Gaye?
Yes.
Super Thrive is Super Thrive is Super Thrive, right? It's not
Yes.
like different ones.
There's not different formulations. It's the same stuff no matter where you get it. And it lasts a long, long time, so because you're only using a teeny little bit. Okay. Once we've got our cup ready and it's got our water in our Super Thrive, we want to put water in a pie pan. And then we start dishing out whatever rooting hormone we're going to use, okay? How many people stick their stems in the jar of rooting hormone? Bad, bad, bad. we go. I use gel. If I use powder, and when we do these Root of Rose clinics, we put out both kinds so people can see what it's like to use both kinds. But you want to take a very small amount, about half a teaspoon, of whatever your product is, and putting it in some other container, a lid. Susan and I get those little plastic sauce cups from the paper plate department in the grocery store that hold about 2 tablespoons of sauce. And that's what we put our rooting hormone in and keep it in while we're doing the process. And then if we have some left over, we just leave it in, put the lid on, leave it in there. Now, let's talk a minute about rooting hormones. Go away, we're not home. Powder. It has a 1-year shelf life if you don't even open the bottle. You start using it, moisture from the air gets in that powder and starts it to deteriorate. So the longer you use it, the same jar, the less effective it becomes because it starts breaking down when you first start getting it. And I've even seen some brands have a 6-month shelf life. So you want to look at the expiration date of your product, and if you use powder and that's your favorite choice product, try to replace it in the fall when you would normally go out and start rooting cuttings. It's not very expensive, but it's well worth the effort by ensuring that you have the cleanest antifungal product that you can get. Gel, on the other hand, lasts forever. And it's like, Renee said, it's just like dippity-doo for those of you young enough to know what dippity-doo is. And it is. It's just like dippity-doo. It's not easily wiped off. You tend to not have as many failures with gel because unlike powder, you can't get too much. And it doesn't take as much product to make it work. So there's lots of different kinds of gel. The closest to here where I get it is Buchanan's Native Plant. But Southwest Fertilizer, I'm sure, sells gel products. And you can. Somebody told me that you can buy it. The guy that distributes Root Tech is actually at Trader's Village, and you can get the big container. But for those of you who like kind of me and not kind of cheap, there are some old DIY rooting hormones. Honey has been used as a rooting hormone since antiquity. I've never been able to get it to work, but it kind of works like gel. It gets on there, it sticks, it doesn't wash off. What it does do is it tends to keep fungus from forming. So it keeps the area clean and free of bacteria. Now a lot of people, Texas, especially rose rustlers, will use willow water. Dr. Bill Welch at Texas A&M has taught me about making willow water. And there's no science to willow water. You take a big jar and you cut up some pieces of willow tree and you let it sit in there overnight, and then it turns a funky green, and then you hydrate your plant, your stems in that. Willow has a natural rooting hormone as part of the chemistry of the plant. And so the theory is that if you hydrate in them, then you're adding that hormone, kind of like Super Thrive. He has not been able to say definitively whether you should not use Super Thrive if you use willow water. I don't have access to a willow tree to test it, So you might, if you're gonna try that, you might use some with and some without, just to see how, if it works different for those two applications. Now we'll talk about dirt. And what your root cuttings is not dirt. And you don't want to use all that really good, expensive mix that you make up and you put your plants in outside. That's got all those great microbes and it's got all kinds of stuff going on and, you know, it's really active. We don't need all of that when we're rooting a cutting. Because there's no way to get all those good things up in the stem because we don't have no roots. Okay? So we save our good premium potting mix for later in the process. We want to use something that is close to sterile to root our cuttings in as we can. And there's just not a whole lot of products out there that does a good job with this. The thing that I have had the most success with is a product that of all places I get at Walmart in little bags. It's called Back Toe. And it's light and it's fluffy and it packs just right and it has just the amount of airspace and it holds water, just the right amount of water. And so I've had the best luck with that. And in a pinch, I have used African Violet potting mix successfully. But when it comes to rooting the cutting, the work is in the front end, and I don't want to risk losing it by using, you know, testing out different products. So if you have something that works for you, by all means keep using it. But that's what has worked for me. Now, we got our cups ready, we got our pie pen ready, we got our dirt. Now it's time to pack our pots. A whole lot, I use 2 1/4 inch Jiffy Pete pots. A whole lot more dirt goes in those pots than you think. You don't just kind of take a spoon and put tablespoons in and think you're done. No, you mash and mash and mash and mash and mash until there's no more airspace in that pot. And if you want it to be level full. Now the thing that when we do these rooted rose clinics, first thing I see people do is take their little filled Jiffy Pete pot and they're cutting and they jam it right through the bottom of the peat pot. That's not gonna work. You gotta have some soil between the bottom of the stem and the bottom of the pot. So the way to keep people from planting too deep is I take a pencil or a chopstick and I measure 2 1/4 inches up that pencil or chopstick, and then I reduce by 1/4 of an inch, and I make a mark all the way around a pencil, and that when I start making my hole in that pot, I know to stop when the dirt line gets even with the mark on the pencil. That way we never plant our stem too deep inside the pot, because what you don't want is the roots coming out the bottom of the hole. So now we got a pot ready. When do we take cuttings? I read an article by some lady in Oregon that you do it at midnight. I ain't doing that. Because it's physically impossible in the dark to get what you need for a cutting. So, I take cuttings and have the best luck taking cuttings early in the morning before it gets real hot outside. And the reason is because the plant's had all night to hydrate itself naturally from moisture in the soil and dew on the plants. So the plant is going to be in its optimum condition before 10 o'clock in the morning. So that's when I try to go out and take cuttings. Now, I don't run out there and let me get 3 stems and run back in the kitchen. No, take something with you out to the garden that you can drop those stems immediately into water. Now, you're going to cut them again. But here's what happens when you make that cut. If you cut yourself, what do you do? The stem does the same thing, and they suck an air bubble. So when we get them back in the house, we're going to cut them again. So word to the wise, don't agonize out there over, do I cut it here, or here, or here? Just cut longer than you need, because you can go in the house and figure all that out later, okay? While you're out in the garden, the idea is to get what you need quick and get in where you can do something with it on the house. Now, the thing that people First place they make a mistake. Where's that stem that somebody brought in? Lorraine, let me see your stick. Did you already throw it away? No, let me have this. Okay. 90% of the people that try this and fail, they are out mining for the biggest thing that they can get. This is not ever gonna root, folks. How big is a root? About the size of your hair? Is it gonna make its way through this stem that I can't bend? No. This is probably even too thick to do a softwood cutting. Now, somebody asked me early on, well, what's a softwood cutting? Neither one of these is too fat. These are hardwood cuts. I would never try to root this, but you could try to root this, but this would be a hardwood cutting. Now, when you go out in the garden and you're trying to figure out what part of the plant do I cut, it needs to have a flower. It needs to have a flower that has faded. Ideally that week, so that the petals are falling off and not before the stamen gets brown, but there's the most energy that can create a new bloom in that piece of this flower. Now this is angel hair pasta and it's too thin, but if I had some regular old spaghetti, you could take a piece of regular old spaghetti and put your fingers and see how it bends. Okay, bend up that way. See how it bends? Okay, that broke. Do that test, because if it doesn't bend, it's too thick. You need it to be thin enough that it has some give, but not so hard for softwood cuttings that the roots can't get out of that old stem. Now, where should I cut? You got two choices. Now I'll tell you which one works better. You want to end up with a stem that has 4 sets of 5 leaflet leaves. Now, some stems have 3 leaflet leaves. Don't count those. There is not a bud eye underneath the stem that has 3 sets of leaves, or a leaflet that has 3 leaves. There is under a 5. That bud eye, which looks like that little knot right there, will above ground be a leaf or a stem that has a flower, or below ground it will be a root. Go fish. Same piece of plant can do 2 things. So you cut in your garden, you're going to cut below a bud eye, and ideally we want to have 4 sets of 5 leaflet leaves, so we have 2 that can be underground, or, whoops, you can cut at a heel, and I'll show you a heel in just a second. I always cut at a heel. A heel is where 2 stems meet. You have twice as many growth points at a heel than what you have at a bud eye. So you have more opportunities for roots if that's where you're taking your cut. Okay? Now, we want them to be pretty when we take them in the house, so we go out there and we cut off the bloom. If you do that with Peggy Martin or Zephyr Dupont or some of those really vigorous climbing roses, you get it in the kitchen, you can't figure out which ends up. And if you plant it upside down, as crazy as it sounds, it won't root. So you leave the flower on so you know which end is up. And that way you avoid having a mix-up and you waste your time. Okay, so I did that. Not one of my climbing Belinda strains rooted because I cut the stem that was hanging over the fence and it was actually up something. But when I got it in the house, it looked like it was right up. So leave that spit bone on to the end so you know which end's up. Okay, here's a heel. See where those 2 stems meet? See all that gnarly stuff? Oh, roots can come out all the way around that. And they will. So I always try to harvest at a heel. Sometimes you can't, but try. You have a better chance of success if you do that. Now,
Okay,
What?
so when you go outside, you cut it below the heel? to
I
bring
cut it
in?
below the heel. I cut into the next stem so that when I get it in the house, I still have a heel. Okay. Now, we got our cuttings, we got them in the kitchen, or in this case, we got them on the patio table. So now what do I do with them? Now it's time to process this. We're fixing to get them in those pots. And to do that, I've got a big carafe of stems that came out of the garden, and my first job is to recut them underwater. So I have a bowl or a kitchen sink filled with water, and I literally take the stems out of the container that I had outside and drop them in the sink, and they may be underwater, the whole piece, it don't matter, they can be floating, it don't matter. But I cut them again underwater, where I want them to be cut for the cutting, because when they do this, they're sucking up water and not air. And that helps with the survival rate and the quickness at which they root by cutting those stems underwater a second time.
Is that plain water?
That's just plain old water, right out of the faucet. Now,
Then what do you do with the heel? You can't cut it.
I cut the stems where I use the heel, I cut below the heel in the garden, so when I get them in the kitchen, I can cut at the heel when I'm ready to process them. Now, y'all have heard at some point in your gardening career, you always cut on an angle. Y'all heard that? Anybody go out there with a measuring thing and see what kind of angle? It don't matter. Only time an angle matters is when you're doing this. Or if you're cutting roses to put in a vase. I had to go to a science class to figure this, learn this. If I cut straight or flush across, the hole is that big. The area that can suck up water is that big. If I cut on a slant, look how big the hole is. I got way more room for hormone, water, whatever, more area for roots to form if I cut on a slant. How much, it doesn't matter. So when you're processing your roses to root for cuttings, cutting on a slant is real important, just to your success rate. So put the stem underwater, make another cut at the appropriate place, either below a bud eye or at a heel. Let them sit in that water a few minutes till you process all of that variety. And when you're finished processing it in the sink, it should look like that, except for this little piece right down here. Don't pay attention to that. You end up with, you take off the bottom two sets of leaves. There was a set of leaves here, and there was a set of leaves right there. Pull those bottom two sets of leaves off. Leave two sets of leaves at the top. First time I did this, I said, that's not enough to do anything. I need half a bush. No, you just need two sets of leaves. Okay, so that's what it should look like when you're through.
Can you pop off those thorns?
I do take off the thorns. I take off anything, whoop, I take off, whoop, come on. I take off anything that's gonna be below the ground. Because when it comes to stability and something rotting or deteriorating, that thorn is gonna rot. Plus, if I pop the thorn off because they're just superficial, then I have another wound. Remember the wounds? Okay, I've got another wound that gives me a place to have more roots. You're going to see some cuttings that have roots coming out of places where there were thorns.
Okay, wait, go back for a second, I got a quick question. You see how you got that little tiny thing that's sticking up there?
This piece right here,
Right.
okay,
Was that the part that?
that was where the flower was.
That's where the flower was and you leave that alone?
I leave the flower part on until I've got it in the pot. That's the last thing I do, is take the flower part off, okay? But now, at this stage, it's ready to go in the pot, okay?
Your leaves, Tom, I thought you said you wanted 5 leaf things. You look like you did.
That's not my picture. But
Somebody
this
took-
had there was one right here, and there was one right here. But I'll tell you why they took it off in a minute. You're getting ahead of me. But that's okay. Okay. Now, we got a stem. We got those cups of super drive. We got to get the super drive up in the stem. Okay, we need as much hormone, rooting hormone inside that plant as we can get. So, we drop our little, as we do our Gaye Hammonds or our Belinda's Dream, we drop those cuttings into our prepared cup of super drive. Some people say that they let it sit in that cup for an hour. I let it sit in that cup overnight. Only because I give these programs all over the country, and I gotta haul that mess. And so I'm not getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to prepare these stems, so I always do it the night before, so the next day I can root cut.
How much
Okay.
water is in those cups?
Huh?
How much water are you putting?
About half a cup. Because, well, transporting it, you end up with half a cup when you get to where it goes. Okay? Now, we're making a greenhouse in a Ziploc bag. And greenhouses are known to promote fungal diseases, just because there's lots of humidity. So we need, whether we are a sprayer or not, we need to treat those stems for a fungus to get them to ward it off should it form in our bag. Now, I've had this bottle of copper fungicide ready mix probably 3 years. Only time I ever use is when I'm giving root and rose clinic program. So once I get my cups with my stems in it, I set them on the ground. I go Fritz, let it sit overnight, and then the next day it will be ready. They'll be ready to, we call it stick. Put them actually in the pots. Now, here's where a lot of people have different approaches. The lady that did this, her name is Kitty Belindez, and she lives in California, and she can root anything, anytime. I have never, ever been able to get a cutting to root where I remove that drastic of a section of green stem. Ever. I don't know if it's because we have so much more fungus pressure than what she has in California, or it's something else that she does that I don't do, but that is very drastic for me. And I usually have stems rot if I cut that deep. Instead of that, what I do is I simply take my fingernail and I just drag it down the green, just rough it up just a little bit. Don't dig and gouge it out, just scrape it lightly. All you're trying to do is like it was sandpaper and just kind of get the smooth off of it. And I do that below a bud eye. Now see, I would have taken this off, this thorn off, and I would scrape down the side where the bud eye is, right below the bud eye. And then there's a bud eye right here. I turn it over and I scrape down that side because I'm trying to take advantage. Remember the hormone with the roots and the wounds? I'm trying to take advantage of as many wounds as I can as places that can form roots. Okay? Now, it's ready for rooting hormone. You decide which kind you're going to use, gel or powder. Doesn't matter. They're both going to go on the same way. You take a Q-tip or a paintbrush and you dab it on every wound. The bottom of the stem where you scrape, where you remove a thorn, any bud eyes that are going to be in the pot below ground, you doctor everything with rooting hormone. Now, because these have been in a damp environment, and if you're using powder, you're going to get way too much, okay? Usually, when you get way too much, you're cutting rocks. I don't know why that's true, but it just seems to happen. So, if you're using powder, less is always more.
If you dry the bottom of the stem before you put it in the powder, you won't get too much.
You won't get as much, but here's what I have what made work. This is like the lady with the rock and the shoe. If I use powder, I will take that stem And I will literally take at the table and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's a magic of a 10. And I will bang it up against something 10 times. And by the time you bang it up against something 10 times, all there is a very light dusting of light gray. There is none of this clumpy business. That will rot something really, really fast. So just barely enough to dust the stem in all the places that were wounded. And then you have a better chance. So, none of that stab it through the pot. You know, we made that nice neat little hole. You just kind of gently hold it over the hole, turn it loose, and it's gonna fall into place. Then you can firm up the soil around the stem. And here's the next place people make a mistake. They get that water bucket, and it floats right out of that pot. Wrong, don't do that. We need Mother Nature to water these because they need just exactly the right amount of water and not too much. So, the way that I have figured that this works is once I have my pot with my stem in it, I set those in that pie pan that we filled with water, and I leave them in that pie pan until the water mark gets 3/4 of the way up that peat pot. So it doesn't matter what size peat pot you use, it could be a 4-inch or a 2.5 or a 3. Once the water line gets 3/4 of the way up the pot, you've got enough water. Okay? But if I put that in a Ziploc bag at that stage, the cutting will certainly rot because there's too much water in that pot. Never, 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 never using peat pots, water from above, because you're going to get too much water, and then it's hard to get rid of. Simple solution, then you take them out, you put them on 3 layers of paper towels and let them drain for about 10 minutes, and now they're ready. While they're draining, it's the right time to write the name of the rose on that Ziploc bag with the Sharpie marker and the date that you took the cutting. Because you want to start watching what's happening closely about 3 weeks later. Usually you start seeing something happen about 3 weeks after the time you get it in the bag. Now, I use 2 1/4-inch Jiffy peat pots because 3 cuttings fit in 1 bag. And the way that you turn that into the greenhouse is you put the 3 pots in the bag, seal the bag up almost all the way closed, stick a straw down in it, blow it up full of water, and then stick it really fast in a little straw. And then blow it up like a balloon. Okay? That's why the zipper ones work better than the pressed together lines, because the zipper ones hold the air better than other types of zip bags. It is a perfect greenhouse at that stage. When you seal that bag, it starts making more moisture, which is why you don't want those pots going in that bag too wet, because you want Mother Nature to do it and keep it with just the right amount of moisture, but not too much that the cutting rots. Now, how do you do that? How do you know? Rose Russ first taught me you go out and put your cuttings, you hang your cuttings on a coat hanger in a tree. I'm not going out and looking in the tree to see what's going on.
Would you rip a hole in it anyway?
No, they use clothespins and clip them to the coat hanger and then go hang it on a limb in the tree. I want to see that house because I want to take some pictures. But I have never had success when the cutting is not right in front of my face every time I'm in that kitchen. So my cuttings stay in my kitchen window. And that's as many as I can do at any one time. Then I have to stop. Now, cuttings need bright but not hot light to root. Most of the time, that's a north-facing window. Ideally, it's a north-facing window that you're at least once a day, because then you can tell if something's going on. And you'll see that I've got the edge of those pots, stop. I've got the edge of those bags hanging off the windowsill. There's a reason. Okay? When the corner of that bag gets a teaspoon of water in it, it's too much. So when you see a teaspoon of water in the corner of that bag, you open up the bag, you take the cuttings out, you pour the water out, you put the cuttings back, you blow the bag back up, and you go on down the road. Now, usually you have to do that once a week. So it's not something you're going to be doing, every day, but if you just hang the edge of the bag off the edge of the windowsill, it'll tell you, and it may be just one that needs to be emptied once a week. It may be all of them. It just depends on the conditions, environmental conditions, where you have that bag. Now, how do I know when it's working? When the cake's getting done? Well, you know because you're going to have new growth start on your cutting. Mother Nature is really cool. Whatever's going on above ground is going on below ground. So if you see new growth up here, you've got growth going on in that pot. First time I saw roots, after that 400 times I tried to fail, I thought there was worms in my pot. And I was furiously tearing that pot apart, and then I got to the roots that were really roots that weren't stuck to the plant anymore, and I was really mad at myself. So, it takes about 3 to 6 weeks to get roots started, and they look like that. And at that point, you can actually pot the whole thing into a 1-gallon pot. Now that's when you want to use your premium potting mix, and do not take this stem out of this pot, because where are these going to go when you do that? Don't break them. They may be gone. So you plant this whole thing, it's just going to fall apart anyway. Okay? And there's, a few days later, and once I start seeing roots, that's when I start potting them up, because if these get exposed to air, they die after a couple of days, and so I try to get them in a pot just as soon as I see white coming out of the bottom of the pot.
And you don't put them in the pot, the 1-gallon pot above the.
No, I do not plant them in the 1-gallon pot any deeper than they were in that little teapot. In fact, when I do it, I try to leave the edge of the teapot just barely above the soil in the 1 gallon, so I can see when it falls apart. Okay, now, that's a cutting with the dirt washed off that had thorns. It was cut on a slant, and look how much spaghetti roots are coming out of the bottom of that plant. So having a root system like that is healthy for the plant, and it's going to be healthy for your seed. And there's some special circumstances. Renee, Susan, and I went up to Farmer's Branch, and we got into a poaching mode. And we took about 100 cuttings, and then we had no pea pots. And we're in a hotel. So what did we have to do? We went down to the Kroger store and we bought some clear plastic cups, just like this. And we poked 3 holes in the bottom of them. And we used that, those clear plastic cups, instead of a pea pot. You are not going to get the plant to soak up water in that plastic cup. So you have to, if you're having to use a plastic cup, you need to moisten your potting mix before you put it in the cup. And how moist? If you can squeeze it and water comes out, that's too wet. If you can squeeze it and it holds together, then that's right. So
Would not enough water soak in through those 3 holes?
No. Not usually. If you do, you're going to have to let it sit in that pie pan a lot longer than just a few minutes. But usually I have ended up, when I've tried to do that, we didn't try it when we poached all the cuttings, but I tried it at home and I wasn't successful because I couldn't, the stem dried out too fast. So you can use, clear cups you can use anything that you can see the roots for in. So whatever it is, it just needs to be clear. Now, sometimes you're gonna root cuttings and you're not gonna have 3 pieces of stem. And if you just put one cutting in a bag, it's gonna rock around and roll around, and then you're gonna dump the dirt out, and then you're gonna lose it. And so the simplest solution is just turn 2 plastic cups upside down on either side in that Ziploc bag, and they're just taking up room, keeping it upright. So that's a way that you can solve that problem. Now, we did this in September at a nursery in Montgomery. We had a bunch of kids, and the kids rooted cutting. And their task was to send me a picture when their cuttings rooted. And we're starting to get pictures. So if these little precious people can do it, there's hope for the rest of us. Anybody got questions? Okay. Somebody gonna tell us how we're gonna do this cutting exchange?
Yes,
Yes.
you said you were gonna tell us where we could get the beet box.
Oh, here's where you can get it from. I order them from Park Seed. And I think I order them from Park Seed because they pay the shipping, but I'm not sure. And I ordered them 500 at a time, and if you order 500, it's a lot cheaper than 10 cents a piece.
5,000 is serious.
Huh?
5,000 is also.
Well, I mean, I give these all over, and we use a lot of people. But those are some of the easy sources that do it by mail order. Yes, sir.
I recently had a cutting, put out 3 nice 3 days. And I decided to take it out of my terrarium.
Okay? His experience was he got it to root, and then he changed its environment abruptly, and it died. Okay? You have to ease the plant into the garden or into its forever home. It's coming out of your kitchen window in a house that's 72 degrees with a fine window that has filtered light, that's not hot, and you got it to root in a very humid environment without fungus, and then you put it in a different potting mix, and if you run right outside and put it in the yard, it will probably die too. So the key is once you get it to that 1 gallon pot, ease it out to where you eventually want it to go. And I keep seedlings in a 1 gallon pot for at least 6 months before they actually make it into the yard. That way I know the root system is probably fully developed. And if you start in the fall, which is the best time to root cuttings, then you can put them back out in the yard in the spring. But at my house, they go from the kitchen to the patio, up against the house on the patio, and then they get further out on the patio where there's more light, and they may stay on the edge of the patio for a couple of weeks, and then they may go into a bed that has a tree, and they may be under the bed of the tree for a while before they actually.
Still in your terrarium?
No, in a pot, but in the shade, in a cooler pot. I just gradually ease them out to where they're out in the open. Now, if you're gonna do this now, we're gonna have a freeze next week, okay? So if you have any seedlings, and you're gonna put them in a 1 gallon pot, this is not the time to leave them outside because they will probably not survive a freeze. These kind of things you're going to bring in the house. Anybody else? Okay.